Being somewhere new conjures vast feelings of uncertainty. To try and make sense of anything around you is an exercise in memory, in experience, in comparison and contrast with what you already know. If you see, feel, smell, or taste what seems to be a plant, you will compare it to every other plant you've ever known. How it might live, how it might reproduce, and its patterns of growth, when it grows the most, and for how long. The reality is, you aren't certain of anything. But from the point of contact, it's all a game of try this and observe that, till you come to some level of comprehension. So what happens when you think you're in such a novel situation as being on another planet? Is all your prior experience useless? How could you begin to understand something you've never interacted with and is unlike anything you've ever interacted with? Sometimes when horror and science fiction meet, their merging signals an end to understanding. Think of H.P. Lovecraft, Bird Box, The Mist, or Annihilation. Often in these unknowable scenarios with unknowable organisms? Are they organisms? I don't know, and neither do you, and that's what's important. That particular style is called cosmic horror. These things can become terrifying through their difference, through the gap between our understanding of the world we live in and something beyond. So when Taylor, Landon, and Dodge crash land onto an unknown planet and the air is breathable, there are plants that utilize drinkable water and grow edible fruit, and there are seemingly straight-up Homo sapiens running around, the viewer might stop and wonder if they aren't just still in Kansas. I'm Elle, and this is Forbidden Zone Realness. I want to discuss the opposite of cosmic horror, when what is terrifying is in the familiar and the everyday, in what you know. From the beginning, Planet of the Apes from 1968 is begging for you, in the face of the unknown, to find familiarity between your experience and the conditions present in the film. The film tries to give you the answer to the main idea and main twist from the beginning. And I know this is technically spoiling, but this is like a 55-year-old movie.
Damn you!
The entire story takes place on our planet Earth some 2,000 years in the future, and while there are many clues leading up to this revelation, all of this is confirmed when Taylor finds the Statue of Liberty, dilapidated and ruined on the coast. His worst fears came true. The humans of the past destroyed their civilization and themselves.
You maniacs! You blew it up!
Listen, I understand Planet of the Apes is not considered by many, or just about any, to be in the horror genre. And how could any movie with a shot like this? But Planet of the Apes is filled with horror, and perhaps that many can't recognize it is integral to its effectiveness. Taylor, Landon, and Dodge are sent on a mission from Earth in the 1970s to test a scientific hypothesis from an unseen Dr. Haslin. There is technically a fourth passenger named Stewart, but she's dead within the first 8 minutes, so... Haslin's whole idea is that as the crew travels further away from Earth near the speed of light, time will dilate between the spacecraft and the planet, meaning hundreds or thousands of years might pass on Earth while months have passed in the ship. The initial goal was to travel to a distant part of space, send a signal back, and prove or disprove this hypothesis. The mission is compromised, however, and their ship crashes into an inland sea in a desert. The threat to their lives begins immediately, as they are far from sustenance and need to address their basic animal needs, like food, water, and shelter. Soon enough, though, through a series of very coincidental similarities to our world, they remedy at least 2 of these issues and simultaneously find a group with whom they can remedy whatever else. Survival was never guaranteed upon their arrival, but these explorers, if only for a moment, are able to forget that they're so far from home. They even get cocky about it.
Look on the bright side. This is the best they've got around here. In 6 months, we'll be running this planet.
After they meet their animal needs and leadership over the non-speaking, mostly unorganized humans is established, they might move on from this animal position towards some form of organized society among these other humans. Oh wait. Any and all comfort ends rapidly as they are chased, beaten, shot at, and herded along with the other humans by an unknown but soon to be revealed force. Ooh, and listen to that sting, see that zoom? Immaculate reveal. There are apes on horseback, apes beating humans, apes with guns, apes capturing humans, apes killing humans, apes pushing humans into ditches to then beat, capture, and kill them. Unfortunately, Dodge is among those killed, and Landon disappears. This is the end of the formal expedition, the end of the noble scientists off to explore and confirm or deny Dr. Haslin's hypothesis, and this is the end of any notion of control Taylor had up to this point. Far from surpassing animal conditions, Taylor is thrown into a literal cage along with some of the other mute humans. For all intents and purposes, he is one of these mute humans, as his vocal cords were harmed after he was also shot in the neck during the hunt. Besides being in a cage by himself, you might say Taylor has been alone for a long time. He's exceptionally cynical, to the point of isolating himself from everyone else. I mean, shit, this guy was egging Landon on for the first 30 minutes of the film. These guys are in the desert about 2 seconds from death, and Taylor's trying to get someone to swing.
Taylor, I'm telling you to climb off my back.
He even admitted that he joined this mission because he didn't care for the society he came from.
I leave the 20th century with no regrets.
Lots of love making, but no love.
That was the kind of world we'd made.
But now he's alone in a human experimentation lab run by the ape state and overseen by animal psychologist Dr. Zira. There are reasoning, understanding beings around him, but one thing common to all the apes is their denial of, in general, the human capacity for consciousness, and in particular, Taylor's existing consciousness. The apes equate humans with pest animals and treat them as such, up to extermination.
Man is a nuisance. He eats up his food supplies in the forest, then migrates to our green belts and ravages our crops.
The only reason Taylor wasn't killed immediately after the hunt is because a small group of humans were kept for the aforementioned experimentation, specifically brain experimentation. This surgery, as we later see was performed on Landon, ends the ability to speak and in essence turns the patient into an unthinking shell. So Taylor really only has two choices. He could try to prove his consciousness to the apes, who are all biased against that premise from the jump, or he can pretty much die. How does one do that, though? How do you prove you have an understanding of yourself as a living being? How do you prove that you can understand a rules-based society, that you can be civil?
From the evidence, I believe his wisdom must walk hand in hand with his idiocy. His emotions must rule his brain. He must be a warlike creature who gives battle to everything around him, even himself.
Well, it's a difficult question, but you know Taylor's gonna try. First, he tries to speak, but obviously can't because of his wounds. He then tries to write, but is thwarted by other humans, unintentionally, and Dr. Zaius intentionally. When he finally proves to Zira and her fiancé Cornelius he can write, and he attempts to convey his life story, he's told he's a liar, which is a very curious accusation to lob at an unthinking, unconscious animal. He tries to escape after learning he's to be gelded, which is a clear sign he understands the consequences of procedures on his person, but is captured and thrown back into a cage. He tries to plead his case during a tribunal in which he is an accused party, which means the ape state believes he understands free will, or at least enough to be held to the social and legal standards of their society. But he's actively suppressed, i.e., scheduled to be gelded and his personality destroyed through experimental brain surgery. We are so beyond Taylor just proving his consciousness, trying to prove his separation from... Taylor now has to go out and find incontestable proof that an advanced, conscious, civil human society existed before ape society, as Cornelius hypothesized based on archaeological evidence he found in the so-called Forbidden Zone. And Taylor finds it, but in finding it, learns that his efforts have been in vain. Despite an entire society of conscious people, they all met the fate he's running from: death. He learns that even societies die, and despite having Nova by his side, finds out he really is the loneliest and last human being like him in the universe.
You who are reading me now are a different breed.
This is the read that's right under your nose for the duration of the film. Taylor's pain permeates this story, and it's a pain only he can truly understand. Whether it's physical, mental, emotional. We exist this way in the real world. No matter how much pain someone is feeling or how much we relate, it is that someone's pain. This is the price of being an individual organism with an ego. Everyone else has to look on kind of confused and maybe uncomfortable like Nova.
We finally really did it.
While we might not understand his exact feelings, especially losing our own world, we do understand loneliness and isolation, the feeling of bearing our own cross, and our empathy for him grows because of it. Though this is all surface level, we shouldn't make the mistake of believing the message ends with Taylor. His particular experience tells us where our attention should be, which is not actually on him. The real horror exists in the story about the apes. All right, I'm being cheeky. Beneath the Planet of the Apes is actually the title of the 1970 sequel, and we will not be talking about that film today. Which is comforting. As for these apes, though, all viewers have an immediate bias upon entering this story to be on the side of Taylor and the other explorers and against the apes. After all, they obviously look different, they have slightly different mannerisms, their homes and other buildings have different architecture, they worship some kind of ape god or prophet, their clothes are ugly. Wait. Never mind, their clothes are poppin'. Maybe you noticed, all the differences I listed are actually just kind of aesthetic. Qualitatively, the apes have way more in common with us in our current society, despite our biases. Let's imagine the setting. Conscious ape people exist together. This includes marketplaces, educational amenities like museums, labs, and schools, places of worship, houses or shelters, offices, an amphitheater, on and on and on and on and on. The similarities go beyond locations. Many of the same social relations exist within these spaces in the ape society as well. Among the young people, there is a growing discontentedness and subculture.
But what'll probably happen is that some money-mad grown-up will put him in a circus, and then we'll have to pay to see what rightfully...
Stop making speeches.
Always giving orders, just like every other adult.
Discrimination between the different groups of apes.
You know how he looks down his nose at chimpanzees.
Throughout the education system, there is purposeful miseducation about science and the history of the world as to oppose scientific heresy. Speaking of scientific heresy, religious dogma abounds. In fact, the ape society appears to be a theocracy. And maybe you're thinking to yourself, oh, well, Elle, I don't live in a theocracy. Surely there's a difference between us and the apes. And my response would be, I'm not holding my breath for the separation of church and state in the United States in the year of our Lord, 2023. Just like at home, scientific truth and human dignity are denied in the name of some book or sacred scroll for the apes that's been edited and translated and retranslated and re-edited for millennia. But also, just like at home, those in power, for all the religious fervor they proclaim, are secretly cynical of the religious dogma and merely use it as a means of maintaining political power.
You're a mutant.
That's what Sarah and Cornelius claim. You're talking heresy, Doctor.
Of course.
To the extent of political violence.
Bailiff, silence the animal.
Wait, let me...
And sham judicial proceedings. A most thorough example of this is the Kangaroo Court, aka Tribunal, for Taylor. He is simultaneously on trial for committing some unknown and unspecified crime, but not on trial because he's an animal.
Dr. Zira, in all fairness, you must admit that the accused is a non-ape and therefore has no rights under ape law.
The prosecution presents evidence that was tampered with and false.
Oh, they cut him. You did that to him, damn you! You cut out his memory, you took his identity!
Those presiding over the tribunal reject evidence with no basis for said rejection.
Stop right there. Let me see that paper. This is Joe.
And then, in one fell swoop, the tribunal calls for Zira and Cornelius to be charged with contempt of the tribunal, malicious mischief, and scientific heresy. Meanwhile, Taylor's cruising on the same track, gelding and then death, of course. If the state allowed for the flow of information and were open to Taylor and his experiences and how they would impact society, well, there probably wouldn't be any reason for the current power structure to remain in place.
Well, if he were a missing link, the sacred scrolls wouldn't be worth their parchment.
Well, maybe they're not.
The power of the ape state and its main justifying ideology, i.e. religion, must instill a culture of ignorance and look over there ism. They don't even just reject Taylor, the foremost threat to the stability of their superstructure. The ape state has a long history of concealing truth from the masses, such as canceling Cornelius' archaeological expedition to the Forbidden Zone after he had already left and was already uncovering potentially world-shattering evidence of human civilization a year before Taylor's arrival. Let's also take into consideration that there is even an area called the Forbidden Zone. Forbidden doesn't mean physically impassable or inaccessible. Forbidden means not allowed. By using our knowledge of the story and the in-universe histories, we can infer that when the sacred scrolls of the apes say,
It's an ancient taboo set forth in the sacred scrolls. The lawgiver pronounced this whole area deadly.
that the Forbidden Zone was created by the nuclear blasts that destroyed New York City, and there are still remnants of the city that exist there 2,000 years later. The apes could have done research into this area long ago, but that would mean questioning their dogma and organization of their society. It is also implied that those in power have some insight about the significance of the Forbidden Zone, but obscure it from all others.
The Forbidden Zone was once a paradise. Your breed made a desert of it ages ago.
When new ideas about the world are brought forward, such as when Taylor explained that his crew arrived by flight, Cornelius' immediate response is that flight is a scientific impossibility. Taylor answered this by making a paper airplane to demonstrate how it floats. This is followed by Minister of Science, Chief Defender of the Faith, and main baddie, Dr. Zaius, bursting in and upon finding the toy, refusing to even try it.
Nonsense.
When the ape masses internalize this mentality, taught and enforced by the state, to cover their eyes, their ears, and their mouths,
Organs are adequate. The flaw lies not in anatomy, but in the brain.
to block off all senses, limit critical thinking, and fear harsh punishment,
Zira, do you want to get my head chopped off?
the state can maintain the status quo, engage in whatever nefarious activities it would like, and control the destiny of all the people without much challenge. This is made all the easier by focusing a considerable part of their ideology on fear of humans. They turned man into a boogeyman, the only problem in their society. The reality is the humans are weak, function with little reason, and have long lost their weapon for organization, language. They are not a threat. Humans can only be a scapegoat for the failures of the ape society and its future. Sound familiar? You see, as the audience, we are able, to a certain extent, to distance ourselves from the more explicit horror of the film. After all, our own society has not been completely destroyed like Taylor's has, or at least not yet. So tomorrow, you will still wake up, your boss will still be breathing down your neck, you will still have that undying student debt, and the US government will continue to slowly strip you of your human rights. We're invited to engage with the implicit horror of the film, to compare ourselves to the apes and our society to the ape society. But invitations involve choice, and to keep it 100, we are ignorant of our societal conditions most of the time, so we are ignorant towards the blatant likeness between and the blatant horror within the ape society and our society. In the beginning of the film, Taylor gives a monologue before entering cryogenic sleep about the mission. He explains how he has no regrets about leaving, though he's lonely.
It squashes a man's ego.
And he berates the culture he left behind by rhetorically asking, does man, that marvel of the universe, that glorious paradox that sent him to the stars,
Still make war against his brother? Keep his neighbor's children starving?
Taylor believes himself beyond the prejudices and petty tribalism he left behind. He even laughs at Landon for planting a small American flag into the dirt after they crashed and made it onto land. In Taylor's mind, in his ideals and philosophy, he understands that those outdated modes of thought are worthless, except that they are worthy of ridicule. He wants to believe that
Somewhere in the universe there has to be something better than man.
Has to be.
but when it comes to actually existing among other beings, away from his literal echo chamber in space, he falls back into the very patterns of thought he criticized Landon for. Patterns of thought stamped on the culture he carries with him everywhere he goes. I mean, calling another being a
Damn dirty ape!
is perhaps not all that enlightened. Through his great desire to distinguish himself and his lost compatriots, his tribe, from the apes, he forgets the faults of his own society. As the film progresses, Taylor starts to believe humans are greater than the apes, that the apes owe something to the humans, that the apes are a lower life form.
Man was here first. You owe him your science, your culture, whatever civilization you've got.
And when he rides off further into the Forbidden Zone to find further proof of advanced human society, he gets an enormous reminder of the folly of man. For all the reasons he derides the apes, he should have remembered why he derided humanity. And we too must be able to confront the truths of our own world to divine the message of the film. We must be able to see the abominable and horrific ideas and practices to understand the future of the apes and ourselves. So, if we are the apes, and the apes are us, it means that we share the same potential fate. The audience that originally saw this film was contending with the Cold War and the potential for nuclear disaster. Well, that Cold War has long since ended, and people today have much less fear about world-ending nuclear power. But make no mistake, we are not in a significantly different position than we were in the 60s, in a significantly different position than the apes. There are still issues the rulers of our society conceal, deceive, and distract from for short-term profit in maintaining mass compliance. And these are the same issues we choose to ignore for temporary comfort. In both cases, it comes at the cost of the long-term survival of humanity, chief among these being anthropogenic climate change. Ultimately, the apes are ignorant towards their own fate. The very horror that befell Taylor's society, his destiny, is the destiny staring the apes in the face and staring us in the face.
What will he find out there, Doctor?
His destiny.
Perhaps in the distant future, there will be an ape that stares upon a derelict statue, a symbol of the greatness of their society and its death. The Planet of the Apes from 1968 is not simply a warning about nuclear catastrophe and unimaginable events that rapidly scrub humans from the face of the planet. This film and its horror are more importantly a warning against willing ignorance and complacency, against short-sighted tribalism and feelings of superiority, against the everyday and the familiar. It wasn't the random people on the bottom rung that destroyed Taylor's society. It was the government that controlled and unleashed the bomb while everyone else watched. At the end of the day, so long as those in power can reorient your focus and attention on inane shit like UFOs, or reorient your anger and frustration towards some other powerless group like trans people, you will ignore the real enemy. The real manipulators, the exploiters, the men behind the curtain that work to maintain your misery and obscure your understanding of the world. You were still in Kansas all along, and Kansas is going to hell.
That's about it.